I'm Natalie, 32 years old, standing in my empty apartment at 3 in the morning, watching security footage on my phone. My mother is jimmying my lock while my father keeps watch. This is the 7th time this month. Tomorrow, I'm disappearing without a trace, and when they break in again, they'll find something they never expected, a police ambush. After years of their invasions, theft, and manipulation, I'm done being their victim. This is how I finally fought back. Before we dive into this wild story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Are you dealing with boundary issues in your own family? Hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves privacy in their own home, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about standing up to toxic family members. Trust me, what happens next will have you questioning everything you thought you knew about parental rights. Growing up in my household meant living without boundaries. My parents, Linda and Robert, believed that bringing me into this world gave them permanent ownership over my life. Privacy was a foreign concept, personal space was rebellion, and locked doors were declarations of war. I learned early that resistance was futile, but I always dreamed of the day I'd escape their suffocating control. When I turned 23 and got my first apartment, I felt like a bird finally freed from its cage. The tiny studio on Maple Street wasn't much, but it was mine. My parents, of course, demanded a spare key immediately. For emergencies, my mother insisted, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against my kitchen counter. What if something happens to you? What if there's a fire? My father nodded along, adding his own dramatic scenarios about medical emergencies and natural disasters. Against my better judgment, I handed over that silver key, watching my mother's fingers close around it like a prize. The violation started small. I'd come home from work to find my throw pillows rearranged, dishes washed that I knew I'd left in the sink, fresh flowers in a vase I didn't own. Just tidying up, my mother would say when I called to ask if she'd been there. "You're so busy, sweetheart. Let me help." But help quickly morphed into invasion. I started noticing other changes: food missing from my refrigerator, my mail sorted on the counter, my bed made with military precision using a technique I'd never learned. The day I came home early from work with a migraine changed everything. I pushed open my door to find my mother elbow-deep in my dresser drawer, my underwear scattered across the bed as she sorted through it. "Some of these are getting ratty," she said without a hint of shame. "I was going to buy you new ones." My father sat on my couch, reading through a stack of papers that I recognized as my private journal. "Interesting poetry," he commented, not even looking up. The confrontation that followed should have been my breaking point. I demanded my key back, my hands shaking as I told them this was unacceptable. The guilt trip that followed was Olympic-level manipulation. My mother cried about how I clearly didn't trust them, how they'd sacrificed everything for me, how other daughters appreciated involved parents. My father's disappointment was palpable as he talked about family bonds and how secrets corroded relationships. By the end, I was apologizing to them, the key still in their possession. Things escalated when I started noticing money missing from my wallet. $20 here, $50 there, always small enough amounts that I questioned my own memory. Then came the day my grandmother's ring vanished from my jewelry box, a family heirloom she'd given me directly before she passed. When I confronted my mother, she gasped in theatrical shock. "Oh honey, you must have misplaced it. You know how scattered you've been lately." But I saw it weeks later on her finger at a family dinner, and when I pointed it out, she claimed it was a different ring entirely. After 6 months of this madness, I changed the locks. The locksmith barely finished installing the new deadbolt before my parents appeared at my door with their own locksmith in tow. We were so worried, my mother wailed loud enough for all my neighbors to hear. "You weren't answering your phone, and we couldn't get in to check on you." Their locksmith, clearly uncomfortable but well-paid, installed a new lock while my parents supervised, pocketing all the keys before handing me a single copy of my own apartment key. The absolute worst violation came 8 months later. I'd been dating Kyle for 3 months, and we'd planned a romantic evening at my place. We were on the couch, lost in each other, when the door burst open. My mother's shriek could have shattered glass. "Oh my God, Robert! She's being attacked." My father rushed in behind her, ready to defend my honor against my boyfriend who was frantically trying to cover himself with a throw pillow. The relationship couldn't survive the humiliation. Kyle tried to be understanding, but after the third time my parents accidentally interrupted our dates, he called it quits. "I can't compete with them," he said sadly. "They're always going to come first." My professional life became their next target. My mother started showing up at my office with elaborate lunches, insisting on hand-delivering them to my desk. "A growing girl needs proper nutrition," she'd announced to my bemused coworkers, unpacking containers of food like I was a kindergartner. The worst came when I was up for a promotion. Somehow, my father got my boss's direct number and called to discuss his concerns about my mental health, suggesting that additional responsibility might be too much for her fragile state. I lost that promotion to a colleague with half my experience. After 2 years of escalating invasions, I made a desperate decision. I found a new apartment across town, a charming one-bedroom in a security building. For 3 weeks, I didn't tell my parents the address, savoring the peace of coming home without fear. But Linda and Robert weren't ordinary parents who'd accept boundaries. When I kept deflecting their questions about visiting, they hired a private investigator to track me down. The first time they showed up at my new building, I was returning from grocery shopping. My mother stood at the entrance, arms crossed, fury radiating from every pore. 3 weeks, Natalie. 3 weeks you've been hiding from us." My father looked genuinely hurt, which was always more manipulative than anger. "We had to pay someone to find our own daughter. Do you know how that feels?" When I refused to let them up, they caused such a scene that 3 neighbors called building security. The building manager, Mrs. Chen, was sympathetic but firm. "I can't have disruptions like this," she warned me after the 3rd incident. "Your parents have been harassing other tenants, demanding to be let in." She showed me complaints from multiple neighbors about the middle-aged couple who'd been pressing every buzzer, claiming family emergencies. I apologized profusely, promising it wouldn't happen again, knowing I had no control over my parents' behavior. Then came the night that shattered any remaining illusions about their boundaries. I was awakened at 2 a.m. by Mrs. Chen and a paramedic at my door. My mother had called 911 claiming chest pains in my building's lobby, insisting she needed to see her daughter before she died. The paramedics, following protocol, had brought her up. She made a miraculous recovery the moment she crossed my threshold. "I just needed to make sure you were safe," she said, clutching her chest dramatically while scanning my apartment for changes. The financial violations reached a new low when I discovered my entire savings account had been drained. In my early 20s, my parents had convinced me to keep them on a joint account for emergencies. I'd forgotten about it after opening my own accounts, never imagining they'd touch money that was clearly mine. $28,000, 5 years of careful saving for a house down payment, gone. When I confronted them, my mother's response was chilling. "We needed it more than you did. Besides, everything you have is thanks to us." The credit card fraud discovery came during a routine loan application. My credit score had plummeted due to 5 maxed-out cards I'd never opened. The addresses traced back to my parents' home, the purchases ranging from luxury vacations to expensive electronics. When I threatened legal action, they countered with emotional warfare. "After everything we've done for you," my father said, his voice dripping with disappointment. "We fed you, clothed you, loved you, and this is how you repay us?" The intervention ambush was their cruelest manipulation yet. I came home from a particularly stressful day at work to find my apartment full of people. My parents had somehow gotten inside and assembled an intervention team, my Aunt Ruth, Uncle George, their pastor, and 2 cousins I barely knew. They sat in my living room like a tribunal, faces grave with concern. "We're here because we love you," my mother began, tears already streaming. "Your behavior has become erratic, pushing away family, keeping secrets. We think you're on drugs." The accusations flew fast and heavy. I was ungrateful, mentally unstable, possibly bipolar, definitely addicted to something. They had evidence: my weight loss from stress, my paranoid behavior about privacy, my erratic work schedule. When I tried to defend myself, they talked over me, each person adding their own observations about my supposed decline. The pastor suggested prayer and rehabilitation. Aunt Ruth recommended a facility she knew about. The entire circus lasted 3 hours, ending only when I threatened to call the police. The ultimatum came as they filed out. My father turned at the door, his expression cold. Either you give us proper access to your life, or we'll have no choice but to petition for conservatorship. Your mother and I have documented everything. Your instability, your paranoia, your inability to maintain relationships. No court would deny us. The threat hung between us like a loaded weapon. They wanted complete control or they'd take it legally. That night, I called Sophia, my only friend who'd witnessed enough to believe me. She arrived within an hour, found me sobbing on my bathroom floor, and immediately offered her couch. "Pack a bag," she said firmly. "You're not staying here tonight." As I threw clothes into a duffel, she helped me see the situation clearly. "This isn't normal, Nat. This is abuse. You need legal help." The lawyer I consulted the next week was sympathetic but honest. Without concrete evidence, a restraining order is difficult. Courts are reluctant to restrict parental access without proof of physical danger or criminal activity. She recommended documentation: photos, videos, written logs of every incident. "Build your case," she advised. "Show a pattern of harassment and theft. Get cameras, record everything." I invested in a hidden security system that week, cameras so small they were virtually undetectable. The main one faced my door, another covered the living room, a third watched my bedroom entrance. Everything uploaded to a cloud server my parents couldn't access. I also installed a door sensor that sent alerts to my phone whenever someone entered. The trap was set, I just had to wait. The first recorded break-in came just 3 days later. At 1 p.m. on a Tuesday, while I was at work, my phone buzzed with an alert. I opened the security app to watch my parents entering with their key. My mother went straight for my bedroom while my father stationed himself by the window as lookout. The video clearly showed her rifling through my closet, pocketing items from my jewelry box, and photographing papers from my desk. They stayed for 47 minutes, violating my privacy in high definition. Armed with video evidence, I began meticulously documenting every violation. I created spreadsheets tracking dates, times, and items stolen. The pattern that emerged was staggering. My parents were entering my apartment an average of 4 times per week, always when they thought I was at work. Sometimes they'd take things, sometimes they'd leave things, but they always invaded. The passport incident nearly cost me my job. I'd been selected for an important international conference, a career-defining opportunity to present my research. 2 days before departure, my passport vanished from the drawer where I always kept it. I tore my apartment apart, checking every possible location, before calling my mother in desperation. "Oh, that old thing," she said casually. "I have it here." It was expiring soon anyway. It had 3 years left on it. I had to drive 2 hours to their house, endure a lecture about responsibility, and beg for my own legal document back. The confrontation over the passport was illuminating. My mother sat at her kitchen table, my passport centered between us like a poker chip. "You're so careless," she said, fingers drumming next to it. "What if you'd lost this overseas? What if something happened and we couldn't get to you?" When I reached for it, she pulled it back. "Promise you'll call us every day during your trip." The negotiation for my own property took 2 hours and countless promises I knew I wouldn't keep. The workplace sabotage intensified after I returned from the conference with glowing reviews. My parents began calling my company's HR department with concerns. They reported that I seemed stressed, that I might be drinking, that family members were worried about my mental stability. HR called me in for 3 separate meetings, each more uncomfortable than the last. I finally had to provide them with evidence of my parents' harassment to keep my job. My boss, thankfully, was understanding once she saw the security footage and phone records. The family flying monkeys mobilized next. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly called with concern about my situation. Aunts sent long emails about family unity and respecting elders. My Uncle George, a man who'd forgotten my name at every family gathering, left voicemails about disappointing my parents in their golden years. Each relative had been fed a different story. I was on drugs, in an abusive relationship, joining a cult, or having a mental breakdown. The narrative changed depending on what would alarm that particular relative most. My sister Brooke's betrayal cut deepest. We'd always been close, united in surviving our parents' suffocating control. I'd given her a spare key months ago for actual emergencies, trusting her completely. The security footage showing her letting our parents in while I was at work felt like a physical blow. When I confronted her, she broke down crying. "They wore me down," she sobbed. "Mom called every day, Dad showed up at my work. They said you were suicidal, that they needed to check on you. I'm so sorry." The birthday break-in reached new levels of violation. I came home on my 30th birthday to find my apartment transformed into party central. Balloons covered every surface, a massive cake dominated my table, and 15 relatives milled around my private space like they owned it. "Surprise," my mother shouted, as if this was normal, as if I hadn't specifically told her I was working late to avoid any celebration. The looks of confusion when I didn't react with joy were almost comical. "She's overwhelmed," my mother explained to the guests. She's always been emotional. During that unwanted party, I discovered the extent of their latest violations. My photo albums had been completely reorganized, pictures removed and rearranged to my mother's liking. Years of letters from friends were missing from the box under my bed, likely thrown away as clutter. My bathroom had been reorganized, medications moved, personal items discarded. They'd even changed my computer wallpaper to a family photo I deliberately deleted. Every corner of my sanctuary had been touched, modified, controlled. The ex-boyfriend stalking added another layer of horror to their invasion tactics. Kyle called me one evening, confused and concerned. "Your dad contacted me on LinkedIn," he said. "He wants to meet for coffee to discuss your well-being." Through social media sleuthing and professional networks, my parents had reached out to every ex-boyfriend they could find. They gathered intelligence about my behavior in relationships, looking for ammunition to support their instability narrative. Medical privacy became another casualty of their obsession. I discovered my mother had been impersonating me at my doctor's office, calling to request information about my prescriptions and appointments. She'd convinced the receptionist she was picking up medications for me, gaining access to my ADHD prescription details. When I confronted the office, they were horrified but admitted she'd been very convincing, knowing my birthday, address, and insurance information perfectly. The prescription theft explained why I'd been struggling with focus and productivity. My ADHD medication kept running out early, but I'd blamed my own poor tracking. Security footage revealed the truth, my mother pocketing my pills during her visits, taking them for her own use or possibly selling them. Each theft carefully calculated to avoid raising suspicion, just enough missing that I'd doubt myself rather than accuse her. The door sensor data painted a disturbing picture. My parents weren't just visiting during normal hours. Entries logged at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4:30 a.m. They were entering while I slept, standing in my apartment in the dark, doing God knows what. The thought of them watching me sleep, going through my things while I was vulnerable and unconscious, made my skin crawl. I started sleeping at Sophia's more often, unable to rest in my own bed. The car tracker discovery happened during a routine oil change. The mechanic called me over, holding a small device. "Found this attached to your undercarriage," he said. "Looks like a GPS tracker. You want me to remove it?" The device was professional grade, not some cheap consumer model. My parents had been tracking my every movement, knowing where I went, who I visited, how long I stayed. The violation of being surveilled so completely left me shaking in the shop's waiting room. The job opportunity that changed everything came in early spring. A position opened in our Seattle office, a senior role with a 50% salary increase and full relocation assistance. It was perfect, career advancement and 3,000 miles between me and my parents. I applied secretly, interviewing via video calls taken in my car to avoid their surveillance. When the offer came, I felt hope for the first time in years. My parents' explosion when I mentioned possibly relocating was volcanic. I'd tested the waters casually, mentioning that my company had opportunities in other cities. My mother's face went from confusion to rage in seconds. Absolutely not, she declared as if she had veto power over my career. Your family is here. Your life is here. I won't allow it. My father was quieter but more menacing. If you try to abandon us, he said slowly, we'll make sure you regret it. No job is worth destroying your family. The smear campaign began immediately. Every relative, family friend, and casual acquaintance received calls about my selfishness. According to my parents, I was abandoning them in their time of need, despite both being healthy 55-year-olds. They crafted stories about health scares, financial troubles, and emotional devastation. My phone exploded with messages from people I barely knew, all parroting the same guilt trips about family obligation and duty. The life insurance discovery came through a piece of misdirected mail. A premium notice for $1 million policy on my life arrived at my apartment, my parents listed as sole beneficiaries. I'd never authorized this policy, never signed documents, never underwent the required medical exam. Further investigation revealed they'd forged my signature, used an old medical report, and had been paying premiums for 3 years. The implications sent chills down my spine. Medical insurance fraud added another criminal layer to their activities. My explanation of benefit statements showed claims for procedures I'd never had, dental work, dermatology visits, even a minor surgery. My mother had been impersonating me at various medical offices, using my insurance for her own treatments. The total fraudulent claims exceeded $15,000. When I reported it to my insurance company, they launched an investigation that would later become evidence in criminal proceedings. The bank account hacking drove me to near paranoia. Despite changing passwords, using two-factor authentication, and security questions, my parents somehow kept accessing my accounts. Money disappeared in small transfers, auto-pay settings changed, new payees added without my knowledge. I discovered they'd social-engineered bank employees, using personal information only parents would know to reset my security. I had to close every account and start fresh with a bank they didn't know existed. The second locksmith incident showed their escalating desperation. Mrs. Chen called me at work, furious. My parents had arrived with a locksmith, claiming I'd been in an accident and they needed emergency access. When Mrs. Chen refused and threatened to call police, they'd tried to bribe the building maintenance worker. Only the threat of arrest made them leave, but not before my mother screamed in the lobby about suing everyone for preventing her from checking on her injured daughter. My first real police involvement came during a dramatic Tuesday evening break-in. I'd stayed home sick, something they couldn't have predicted. When I heard the key in the lock, I called 911 and hid in my bedroom closet. The officers arrived to find my parents casually packing my electronics into bags. We're her parents, my mother explained calmly. She asked us to pick these up for repair. Without me there to contradict them, the officers might have believed it. Instead, I emerged from hiding to file a report. The officer's dismissal felt like a slap. "Ma'am, this seems like a family matter," Officer Williams said after taking statements. "They have a key, they're your parents, no one was hurt. Maybe try talking this out?" Despite showing him security footage of previous break-ins, receipts for stolen items, and documentation of harassment, he refused to file charges. "Get a restraining order if you're that concerned," he suggested before leaving my parents with a warning about miscommunication. Property damage became their new tactic. If they couldn't steal, they'd destroy. I started coming home to accidents, a broken lamp, a cracked mirror, a torn painting. Always things with sentimental value, never anything that would justify insurance claims. My mother would admit to these mistakes with fake remorse. I was trying to dust and it just fell, she'd say about a vase my best friend had made me. The psychological warfare of slowly destroying my possessions was almost worse than theft. The pet threat escalated my fear to new levels. I'd adopted Luna, a sweet tabby cat, for companionship and comfort. One evening, I found a note tucked under Luna's collar, "Such a pretty cat. Would be a shame if she got out and got lost." The handwriting was disguised, but I knew. Luna went to stay with Sophia after that, one more piece of my life I had to hide to keep safe. The fact that they'd use an innocent animal as leverage showed how far they'd fallen into their obsession. Their friend network poisoning reached professional levels of manipulation. I started getting messages from college friends I hadn't spoken to in years, all concerned about my mental health. My parents had stalked my social media, identified connections, and reached out with elaborate stories. They told my college roommate I was homeless and too proud to ask for help. They told my study group I was in an abusive relationship and needed intervention. Each lie carefully crafted to seem plausible, mixing truth with fiction. The romantic sabotage with James, my new boyfriend, followed a familiar pattern. We'd been dating 2 months when he started getting anonymous calls. Concerned family members warning him about my violent tendencies, my pathological lying, my dangerous instability. To his credit, James told me immediately and blocked the numbers. But the calls persisted from new numbers, the messages escalated, and eventually, he had to change his number entirely. The stress of dating someone whose parents actively sabotaged relationships took its toll. Work harassment reached a critical peak when my parents discovered the Seattle opportunity. Daily calls to HR became hourly. They filed formal complaints about the company taking advantage of a mentally ill woman. They threatened lawsuits for enabling her delusions. They contacted corporate headquarters with wild accusations about my supervisor. My employer's legal team finally had to issue a cease and desist letter, but the damage to my reputation was done. The Seattle office quietly rescinded their offer, citing complicated circumstances. The inheritance threat was their final financial weapon. My grandmother had left me $50,000 in a trust, accessible on my 30th birthday. My parents, as alternate trustees, began the legal process to have me declared incompetent to manage the funds. They submitted their evidence, the intervention, the family testimonies, creative interpretations of my behavior. The legal battle would drain my savings and sanity, exactly as they intended. Finding their key stash during a desperate search for Luna's toy revealed the scope of their preparation. Hidden in my kitchen junk drawer, wrapped in a rubber band, were 17 copies of my apartment key. They'd been making duplicates for months, distributing them to flying monkeys, keeping backups for any scenario. The realization that changing locks was futile against such determination broke something in me. I sat on my kitchen floor, surrounded by those keys, and finally understood, conventional solutions wouldn't work against unconventional parents. Meeting Detective Harrison changed the trajectory of my fight. Unlike Officer Williams, she listened to my entire story without dismissing it as family drama. A veteran of domestic crimes, she recognized the patterns immediately. Parental abuse of adult children is more common than people think, she said, reviewing my evidence. But it's harder to prosecute because society assumes parents have good intentions. She saw through that assumption to the criminal behavior beneath. Building the case required meticulous documentation. Detective Harrison walked me through creating admissible evidence chains, proper video storage, witness statements. Sophia provided a sworn affidavit about what she'd witnessed. Mrs. Chen documented every building disruption. My therapist, whom I'd started seeing for anxiety, wrote professional assessments of the psychological impact. Even James contributed a statement about the harassment he'd endured. Each piece built a foundation for legal action. The restraining order attempt illuminated judicial bias. Despite mountains of evidence, Judge Morrison seemed skeptical. "These are your parents," he said, as if DNA excused criminal behavior. "Surely this can be resolved without legal intervention." He required more concrete evidence of danger, dismissing theft, harassment, and stalking as insufficient. I left court that day understanding that the system wouldn't protect me until something worse happened. Detective Harrison suggested we create that something worse ourselves. Developing the trap required careful planning. Detective Harrison couldn't officially advise me to set up a sting operation, but she could share hypothetical scenarios about catching criminals in the act. If someone were to maintain a residence as bait, she mused, while living elsewhere secretly, and if that person had cameras connected to police monitoring, well, that would be interesting. Her hypothetical became my blueprint for freedom. Finding the new apartment required espionage-level secrecy. I searched only on computers at the library, viewed apartments using Sophia's car, paid deposits with cashier's checks from my new bank. The place I found was perfect, a converted loft in an artist building 40 minutes away, security that required key fobs, and neighbors who minded their own business. I signed the lease under a shortened version of my middle name, paid 3 months in advance, and told absolutely no one except Sophia. The misdirection campaign was almost fun. I started dropping hints about moving to Portland, leaving brochures around my apartment, making calls to Oregon realtors while at home where I knew they'd hear through their surveillance. I created false trails on my computer, searching Portland apartments and job listings. Meanwhile, I slowly moved my important belongings to the new place, one backpack at a time, always checking for trackers, always taking circuitous routes. Setting up the sting required technical precision. Detective Harrison arranged for my apartment's security system to feed directly to a police monitoring station. Silent alarms were installed on all entry points. Cameras covered every angle, with backup recording systems they couldn't disable. We placed bait strategically. Fake jewelry that looked valuable, a decoy safe with traceable bills inside, electronics with hidden tracking devices. The trap was elaborate, thorough, and completely legal. The decoy apartment needed to look lived in. I maintained routines there, stopping by daily to create activity. I left lights on timers, had mail delivered, even ordered takeout to maintain appearances. Fresh groceries appeared weekly in the fridge for them to steal. Dirty clothes in the hamper, used dishes in the sink, all the props of a life still lived there. Meanwhile, my real life blossomed in a space they'd never violate. Silent alarm installation was the trickiest part. The system needed to alert police instantly without any sound or visible sign. Detective Harrison brought in a specialist who installed pressure sensors, infrared triggers, and magnetic contact points all connected to dispatch. The moment unauthorized entry occurred, units would roll. No sirens, no warning, just swift arrival to catch criminals in the act. We tested it twice with approved entries, response time under 4 minutes. Planting evidence felt like leaving cheese in a mousetrap. I strategically placed a Cartier watch I'd bought from a pawn shop, visible but not obvious on my dresser. Important-looking documents in manila folders on my desk, actually copies of public records with no value. A laptop bag by the door containing an old broken computer. Everything catalogued, photographed, ready to prove theft when they inevitably took the bait. The staged scene required Oscar-worthy set dressing. Fresh flowers on the table, a half-full coffee mug on the counter, yesterday's newspaper open to the crossword. My bed unmade just enough to suggest recent use, a book face down on the nightstand. Even my shower had fresh water droplets. Every detail crafted to say she just stepped out, she'll be back soon, encouraging longer visits, more thorough crimes. Coordinating with building security meant bringing Mrs. Chen into partial confidence. I explained I was dealing with stalkers and needed to catch them for prosecution. She didn't need to know they were my parents. Her instructions were simple: if anyone tried to access my apartment claiming emergency, delay them and immediately call the number Detective Harrison provided. Her enthusiasm for catching the people who'd harassed her building was gratifying. The waiting game tested every nerve. Each day I checked my old apartment, maintained the illusion, then retreated to my secret sanctuary. I'd watch the feeds from my new place, seeing my parents enter and exit like clockwork. Always taking something, always violating boundaries, never knowing they were building their own case. Detective Harrison checked in weekly, encouraging patience. "Give them enough rope," she counseled. "They'll hang themselves." Close calls nearly derailed everything. Once, I ran into my Aunt Ruth near my old neighborhood and had to improvise a story about apartment hunting nearby. Another time, my car broke down blocks from my new place, requiring a tow to a distant mechanic to avoid location exposure. The closest call came when Brooke showed up at my old apartment while I was there, wanting to talk about our parents' escalating behavior. I had to pretend everything was normal while hiding evidence of the sting. Sister's suspicion grew as I became harder to pin down. Brooke noticed I was never home when she dropped by, that my stories didn't quite add up. "Where are you really, Nat?" she asked during one of our strained coffee meetings. "I know you're planning something." I wanted desperately to confide in her, but her previous betrayal made trust impossible. I deflected with work excuses, maintaining the facade while dying inside at our fractured relationship. Maintaining cover became exhausting. Living a double life, keeping stories straight, always watching for tails or trackers drained me mentally. But freedom waited on the other side of this deception. Each night in my peaceful new space, Luna purring beside me, I remembered why the elaborate scheme was necessary. My parents had forced me to these extremes. Their inability to respect boundaries had created this situation. I was just playing the game they'd started, but with better rules. The final break-in began at 2:47 a.m. on a humid Tuesday in September. I was safely in my new apartment, Luna curled against my side, when my phone erupted with alerts. Multiple cameras activated, silent alarms triggered, police dispatch notified. I opened my laptop to watch the live feed, my heart pounding as my parents entered what they believed was my home. This was it, the culmination of months of planning, the moment they'd finally face consequences. Their routine unfolded with practiced efficiency. My father took his usual position by the window, occasionally peering through the blinds like a professional lookout. My mother went straight to work, pulling empty tote bags from her purse like Mary Poppins of theft. She moved through my apartment with the confidence of someone who'd done this dozens of times, because she had. The cameras captured every movement in crystal clarity, evidence mounting with each violated boundary. Finding the bait triggered visible excitement in my mother. She held up the Cartier watch, examining it under my table lamp before wrapping it carefully in tissue paper from her bag. Into her tote it went, followed by the manila folders of fake documents. She actually smiled while stealing from her own daughter, a detail that struck me as particularly chilling. My father called softly from his post, 5 minutes, Linda, like they were on some sort of game show. The safe-cracking attempt provided almost comedic relief in the tension. They'd brought tools, a stethoscope, a small drill, even a printout of safe-cracking instructions from the internet. My mother worked on the decoy safe while my father abandoned his post to help. Neither noticed the infrared sensors recording their every move, the traceable bills inside waiting to become evidence. Their focus was complete, criminals absorbed in their crime. Police arrival was swift and silent. Through my cameras, I watched officers position themselves outside my door, others covering the fire escape. Detective Harrison led the team, her face set with professional determination. They waited until my parents were deep into the apartment, arms full of my belongings, completely committed to their crime. Then, with choreographed precision, they entered. "Police! Nobody move!" The shock on my parents' faces was a moment I'd replay forever. The arrest unfolded like a scene from a crime show. My mother dropped the bags, stolen items spilling across my floor. "There's been a mistake," she stammered. "We're her parents. We have a key." My father tried a different approach, indignation and authority. "You have no right to be here. We're checking on our daughter." Detective Harrison's response was perfect. "Sir, you're under arrest for breaking and entering, theft, and criminal trespass. You have the right to remain silent." Their protests escalated as handcuffs clicked into place. "We're her parents," my mother shrieked, as if DNA was a get-out-of-jail-free card. "We have every right to be here. She gave us a key." The lies flowed freely, each one captured by the still-recording cameras. They claimed I'd asked them to get things, that they were worried about me, that this was all a misunderstanding. The officers remained professionally unmoved, reading rights and documenting evidence. Evidence seized from the scene was damning. Beyond the planted items, my mother's bag contained 2 of my credit cards, my spare car keys, medication bottles with my name, and jewelry I hadn't even noticed was missing. My father's pockets held copies of my bank statements and a flash drive later found to contain photos of my personal documents. They'd been building their own files on me, probably for the competency case or identity theft. The violation ran deeper than I'd imagined. The interrogation footage, which I viewed later through legal channels, revealed their true nature. Separated and questioned individually, they gave conflicting stories. My mother claimed I was mentally unstable and they were protecting me from myself. My father insisted they had permission to take things, that I was forgetful and often asked them to retrieve items. Neither story held up against the video evidence of them sneaking in at 3 a.m. with bags specifically for stealing. Additional charges piled up as the investigation expanded. The forged life insurance policy, medical insurance fraud, identity theft, credit card fraud, each crime adding years to potential sentences. Detective Harrison told me later that the prosecutor was shocked by the scope of criminal activity. "I've seen domestic abuse cases," he said, "but the calculated nature of this, from parents, it's extraordinary. My parents had committed enough crimes to fill a small filing cabinet." Family explosion was immediate and intense. By dawn, my phone was unusable from the barrage of calls and messages. Aunt Ruth left a voicemail calling me a traitor to blood. Uncle George threatened to disown me from a family I'd gladly leave. Cousins I'd forgotten existed suddenly had strong opinions about respecting elders. The narrative was clear: I was the villain who'd trapped poor, loving parents who only wanted to help their ungrateful daughter. Brooke's confrontation came that afternoon. She appeared at my old apartment, which I was there to meet with Detective Harrison, her face a mix of fury and confusion. "How could you?" she demanded. "They're our parents. You had them arrested like common criminals." I showed her the security footage, the evidence lists, the documentation of years of abuse. Watching her worldview crumble as she recognized our parents' actions was painful but necessary. "Oh my God," she whispered, "seeing them steal from me. How long has this been happening?" Media attention arrived faster than expected. "Adult daughter has parents arrested for breaking in" made a catchy headline. Reporters called for comments, showed up at my building, turned my private pain into public consumption. I declined all interviews on Detective Harrison's advice, but my parents didn't. They gave tearful statements about their troubled daughter, painting themselves as victims of mental illness and ingratitude. The court of public opinion split predictably along generational lines. Work vindication felt hollow but necessary. My employer's legal team issued a statement supporting me, acknowledging the harassment they'd endured from my parents. The truth about the Seattle job offer emerged, how their interference had cost me the opportunity. Colleagues who'd witnessed my mother's lunch deliveries and dramatic visits suddenly understood the real dynamic. Professional sympathy was nice, but it couldn't undo the career damage inflicted by parental sabotage. The bail hearing provided another stage for their performance. My mother sobbed dramatically while my father stood stoic and wounded. Their lawyer painted them as loving parents driven to desperation by a daughter's rejection. The prosecutor methodically presented evidence of calculated criminal behavior spanning years. The judge, thankfully, saw through the act. Bail was set high with conditions: no contact with me, surrender of all keys to my residence, GPS monitoring, and mandatory psychological evaluation. Their retaliation attempts began immediately after release. Unable to contact me directly, they escalated through proxies. Flying monkeys delivered messages, flowers appeared at my work with guilt trip notes, packages arrived at my old apartment with childhood photos and manipulative letters. They attempted to access my bank accounts 17 times in 3 days. My phone carrier reported multiple attempts to add lines to my account. Even restrained, they couldn't stop trying to control. Flying monkeys increased their attacks as the criminal case proceeded. I received letters from relatives I'd met once at childhood reunions, all echoing the same themes: family forgiveness, respecting parents, mental health concerns. A great-aunt I'd forgotten existed sent a Bible with highlighted passages about honoring thy father and mother. The family priest left voicemails about the sin of pride and the virtue of forgiveness. Each message designed to break my resolve, make me drop charges, return to being their victim. Standing firm against the onslaught was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Every atom of my conditioning screamed to apologize, to make peace, to sacrifice my well-being for family harmony. But Detective Harrison's words echoed in my mind: they're counting on your guilt. It's their weapon. Don't give it to them. I archived every message, documented every violation of the no-contact order, built an even stronger case for the prosecution. My freedom was worth more than their approval. The court case concluded with a whimper rather than a bang. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the possibility of serious jail time, my parents' lawyer negotiated a plea deal. They pleaded guilty to multiple counts of theft, trespassing, and harassment in exchange for suspended sentences. The terms were strict: 5 years probation, no contact with me whatsoever, mandatory therapy, and full restitution for stolen funds. Watching them accept responsibility, even if only to avoid prison, felt like a victory I'd never thought possible. Probation terms became their new boundaries, enforced by law rather than love. GPS anklets ensured they couldn't come near my home or workplace. Weekly check-ins with probation officers replaced their invasive check-ins with me. Mandatory therapy sessions forced them to confront behaviors they'd always justified. The court accomplished what I never could, making them face consequences. The system that had initially failed me ultimately provided the protection family should have given freely. The family divide was swift and brutal. Relatives chose sides like children in a divorce. Aunt Ruth declared I was dead to her branch of the family tree. Uncle George sent a formal letter disinheriting me from their will I didn't know I was in. But surprises emerged too. Distant cousins reached out with their own stories of boundary violations, thanking me for being brave enough to stand up. Great-Aunt Helen, the Bible sender, later apologized after learning the full truth. The family schism was painful but clarifying. My therapy journey began in earnest after the legal dust settled. Dr. Martinez specialized in family trauma and narcissistic abuse. Through our sessions, I began understanding the deep programming that made me accept the unacceptable for so long. We worked through guilt, hypervigilance, and the tendency to over-explain myself. Learning about narcissistic family dynamics was like finding a roadmap to my own life. Every session revealed another layer of manipulation I'd internalized as normal. The revelation about narcissistic abuse patterns changed everything. Dr. Martinez explained how narcissistic parents view children as extensions of themselves, not separate people deserving autonomy. Their inability to recognize boundaries wasn't confusion but entitlement. The theft, stalking, and control were symptoms of their need to possess me completely. Understanding this pathology didn't excuse their behavior but helped me stop blaming myself for their choices. I wasn't a bad daughter. I was a survivor of systematic abuse. Career flourishing felt like breathing after drowning. Without their sabotage, I excelled at work. The Seattle position reopened, and this time nothing prevented my acceptance. My colleagues, now aware of what I'd endured, became fierce advocates. The promotion I'd lost years earlier was reconsidered and granted with back pay. Projects flowed smoothly without interruption from dramatic parental visits. Success was sweeter for having been denied so long. My new relationship with James deepened once the external chaos ended. He'd weathered the storm of their harassment, supporting me through the legal proceedings. Without anonymous calls or manipulative messages, we could focus on building something real. He met Luna officially when I finally felt safe bringing her home. Watching them play together in my secure apartment, knowing no one would burst in uninvited, was a simple joy I'd never take for granted. Rebuilding friendships required vulnerability and honesty. I reached out to people I'd pushed away during the worst of my parents' behavior, explaining what had really been happening. Many understood immediately, sharing their own family struggles. Sophia remained my rock, but new supports emerged. A support group for adult children of narcissistic parents became my chosen family. We understood each other's triggers, celebrated boundaries held, mourned the parents we deserved but didn't have. Brooke's apology came 6 months after the arrest. She'd started her own therapy journey, recognizing how our parents had manipulated her into enabling their abuse. "I'm so sorry," she wept during our first real conversation. "I thought I was helping, but I was just another tool for them to use against you." Our relationship slowly rebuilt on a foundation of mutual respect and boundaries. We compared notes on childhood, recognizing patterns we'd been too enmeshed to see before. The inheritance from grandmother became a symbol of freedom. With my parents legally unable to interfere, the $50,000 transferred smoothly on my 30th birthday. I used it as a down payment on a small condo in Seattle, a space truly mine that they'd never entered, never violated. Signing those papers felt like claiming territory in my own life. Grandmother would have been proud to see her gift facilitating my independence from the children who disappointed her. Creating chosen family filled the spaces blood relatives had vacated. My support group became holiday companions, birthday celebrants, emergency contacts. James's family welcomed me warmly, modeling healthy boundaries and respectful relationships. Friends became siblings, mentors became parents, colleagues became cousins. The family I built through choice and mutual respect surpassed anything genetics had provided. Love wasn't obligation but selection, and I selected wisely. Setting boundaries became second nature with practice. No became a complete sentence. I stopped explaining, justifying, or apologizing for my limits. When flying monkeys occasionally surfaced with messages, I simply blocked and moved on. The guilt that once consumed me faded to occasional twinges, easily managed with therapy tools. Boundaries weren't walls but doors, and I controlled who got keys. The power was intoxicating after a lifetime of powerlessness. The 1-year mark warranted celebration. Friends gathered in my Seattle condo for a Freedom Day party. We toasted boundaries held, toxicity escaped, lives reclaimed. Looking around at faces who loved me without conditions, I felt wealthy beyond measure. The parents who'd claimed ownership of my life were footnotes now, replaced by people who celebrated my autonomy. The contrast was stark and beautiful. Occasional flying monkeys still appeared like seasonal allergies. A cousin messaging about forgiveness, an aunt sending holiday cards despite no contact wishes. I handled them with practiced ease, no longer triggered into guilt spirals. Their messages went into a folder for potential restraining order evidence, then were forgotten. My life was too full, too free, too joyful to waste on people who couldn't respect basic boundaries. They were gnats buzzing at the windows of my peace. Inner peace manifested in unexpected ways. I no longer jumped when someone knocked on my door. My heart didn't race checking mail, fearing manipulative letters. Sleep came easily in my sanctuary, uninterrupted by midnight invasions. The hypervigilance faded, replaced by normal awareness. I could leave items out without fear of judgment or theft. My space reflected my choices, my taste, my life. The freedom of living without invasion was a daily gift. Reflection on the journey revealed the most important truth: I was never the problem. The narrative my parents crafted, that I was difficult, ungrateful, unstable, was projection of their own dysfunction. Every boundary I set was reasonable. Every limit was logical. Every consequence they faced was earned. The guilt they'd programmed into me was their weapon, not my truth. I wasn't a bad daughter for wanting privacy, autonomy, respect. I was a human being claiming basic rights. The lesson learned through pain and persistence was simple but revolutionary. Real family respects your boundaries. Blood doesn't grant ownership of your life. The people who truly loved me proved it through respect, not possession. They celebrated my independence rather than sabotaging it. They supported my growth rather than stunting it. Family wasn't about DNA but about mutual care, respect, and healthy love. The parents who gave me life had tried to steal it back, but I'd claimed it fully as my own. My story resonates with more people than I expected. When I finally shared publicly, messages poured in from others trapped in similar situations. Adult children afraid to set boundaries, convinced they owed infinite access to abusive parents. My journey gave them hope that freedom was possible, that choosing yourself over toxic family was valid. If my pain could light someone else's path to freedom, then every moment of suffering had meaning. Today, I live peacefully in Seattle with James and Luna. My career thrives, my relationships flourish, and my boundaries stand firm. The parents who once consumed my life are strangers now, unable to breach the walls their own actions built. Sometimes I wonder if they ever truly reflect on what they lost, but mostly I don't think of them at all. My life is too full of chosen family, genuine love, and hard-won peace. The girl who once apologized for wanting privacy is gone, replaced by a woman who knows her worth and guards it fiercely. And that woman is finally, truly free. What boundaries have you had to set with family members who couldn't respect your autonomy? Have you ever faced the difficult choice between family harmony and personal safety? Drop a comment below sharing your own experiences with toxic family dynamics. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content about surviving family trauma and building healthy boundaries. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that they're not alone in dealing with invasive relatives. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, you deserve respect, privacy, and peace, regardless of who's demanding otherwise. May you find the strength to claim the life that's rightfully yours, and may your boundaries stand as firm as castle walls against anyone who would violate them.